Like, it made me just feel very uncomfortable at times and just kind of like icky reading it. I would highly recommend reading it. Hey y'all, what's up? It's Brandon Lord. Welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm going to be kind of briefly discussing the books I've read so far in 2023. The reason being, I made a video earlier this year of like New Year's resolutions, and one of them was I wanted to read more, and I wanted to make sure I read at least one book a month. Now, when my friend Katie heard this in my video, she's been reading more too, and she was like, ooh, we should start a book club. And I was like, that could be fun. And then with that, I came up with the idea to have a podcast, like a little book club podcast. So we have that. It's called the Literary Latte Podcast. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Feel free to rate, review, subscribe, give us all the listens, support us. Doing all this though has helped me stay accountable for my resolution. And I am proud to say that this is one of the resolutions I made that I've actually stuck with. But I thought I'd share the books that I've read so far. Really just to brag about the fact that I've kept up with this resolution. But also, if you're looking for a book to read, here's some recommendations. So these are all the books we've read so far. We've done 5 now, and I have to say, I've really liked all 5, so I'll start off with that. I don't know if I'd recommend all 5, but I definitely have enjoyed reading all 5. Let's start with the first one we read for January. This was This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub. I like this one. It's about this girl named Alice. She's about 40. She's kind of in a place in her life where it's very stagnant, and she doesn't really like her job, and she's just kind of like going through the motions and coasting, and her dad's sick in the hospital. And then I think when it's about to be her 40th birthday, actually, she goes back to her childhood home, and she goes into like this shed area, and then she wakes up and she's 16 again. And throughout this journey of being 16 again, she's able to see her dad healthier. She's able to kind of like build an even stronger relationship with him, and not really only him, also other people in her life that she had felt like she held back on, and kind of just like taking more chances and not overthinking things. It's a pretty cool journey. I liked it a lot, I will say. And Katie agreed with this as well. The ending kind of felt a little rushed and like a little sloppy, and felt like it could have been a little better. But the more I think about this book, the more I did enjoy reading it. So I did like it. I thought it was easy to read. I felt like you really got like connected with the characters and you were invested. We had given it, so on the podcast, we rate things out of like on a scale of 1 to 5 lattes. So with this one, and because we're accountants, we do like decimal points and all that fun stuff. We gave it 3.03 out of 5 lattes. And I think if I were to rate it again, thinking back, I probably would have like given it a slightly higher rating. But like, I feel like a 3 is pretty solid. I said before, I liked all the books, but I don't know if I would recommend them. This is kind of one where I wouldn't say you had to read it. Like, if you want to, sure, but I wouldn't bring it to you and be like, oh my god, you have to read this. But it was a good book, so if you happen to read it, I do feel like you would like it. All right, the second book I read this year was The Lion's Den, and this was a fun one for sure. It's about this girl, Belle. She's kind of a struggling actress in LA, and she goes on like this yacht trip in Europe with her bestie, who's like, she's kind of had a weird relationship with, but the bestie has like an older rich boyfriend who she's like about to get engaged to, and he's like bringing her and all her friends onto like this yacht trip. It's pretty sketchy from the jump. And basically throughout the book, there's a lot of things unveiled. There's a lot of secrets characters are keeping, and like there's a lot of flashbacks to the past as well to give more context to like the friendship between Belle and, what was her name? One second. Summer. Her name was Summer. She was awful. She's crazy. And you learn about that kind of messed up dynamic and all that. And then there's a bunch of other things. Like in the yacht, it's pretty weird. Like the rules, like their door locks at night. And then also there's like no reception. They had to turn in their passports in the beginning. A lot of sketchy stuff. But it's pretty entertaining. There are a lot of twists and turns with this book. We actually gave it 3.88 out of 5 lattes, and I stand by that. I do think the one thing that I didn't really like about the book was you don't really get too invested in any of the characters. Like, you get invested in the story, but you're not necessarily like emotionally connected to any of the characters. They're kind of all like... But overall, I would actually recommend this book because it was a fun read. The third book I read this year was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This one was probably... I think this was the best book I've read so far in 2023. As far as it really was the most well-rounded, it was just truly a journey, like all throughout. It's set in France in 1714, and Addie LaRue is basically unhappy in her life. You know, there's not a lot of things women can do. They usually just get married and have kids in this time, and she just feels very restricted and wants to see the world. It gets to a point where like she prays to a god. They say in the book, don't pray to the gods that show up at night. And she did that. Basically, Addie wants to live a life untethered to anything and basically just be able to be free. But because it's a god at night, it's kind of a twist. And she ends up being granted a life where nobody remembers her ever, and somebody can talk to her at one point, and then like 30 seconds later, they'll forget they even like saw her or who she was. They'll be like, who are you? And it's crazy because it's really the book, it goes back and forth between 2014 and like the 1700s, and like she's been living this way for like 300 years and like no one's remembered her until one day in 2014 in New York City, someone does. And I don't want to spoil too much because I actually think you really should read this book. I highly recommend. But, you know, you find out why that person remembers them, and you really get emotionally connected to Addie. I have to say, like, in the beginning, it made me really sad, this book, because it was like she hated her life, and then when she made the deal, everyone in her life forgot her, including her parents, and she was just, like, left, like, homeless, just trying to, like, make do. And it was like a lot. It was sad. We gave this book a 4.15 out of 5 lattes. It was definitely both of our favorites at the time we did it. All right, the next book I read was probably the most frustrating book. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This one I think trended on TikTok or something like that. It's basically about these two friends, Sam and Sadie. They became friends as children, but then had a falling out, but then reconnected in college. And through that, one of the things that bonded them growing up was playing video games. And when they reconnect, they end up actually making a video game together that ends up becoming extremely successful. And they start like this extremely successful company, and they make a bunch of different other games. But there's a lot of like tension that builds up between them as well. They're both the worst communicators. There's heartache, there's deceit, there's laughter, there's love, there's pretty much everything. I feel like a lot of these books, they go back and forth between the future, the present, and like the past. I will say with this book, it wasn't the most seamless when they would do it. Like, it would be like one paragraph you're in the present, and then all of a sudden you're like in the future. And it was a bit confusing at times. But I will say though, with this book, you do get really, like, I would say, though the characters were frustrating, you do get pretty, like, emotionally connected to them. Even if you're, like, annoyed with them, you do kind of see where they're coming from, and you're able to sympathize with them. So there is a lot of that. This book was pretty emotional, I feel. And it's also a book I feel like I normally wouldn't have picked to read, just based off, like, it's about like creating video games and all that stuff. But I actually thought learning about the process of creating video games in some points, and like also the creative and technical processes with it, I thought that was actually pretty interesting to read about. We gave this one 3.63 out of 5 lattes. I will say for me, the ending personally frustrated me. It didn't frustrate Katie though. Read and find out if it will frustrate you. All right, the last book we have read so far, The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This was definitely a very different tone than the other books we read. It's basically about this woman, Alice, had killed her husband, shot him like 5 times in the head, and then went silent afterwards. And no one knows why she went silent, why she killed her husband, any of that. 6 years later, Theo, a psychotherapist, he had followed her case because it became pretty mainstream given the severity. And also she was like a famous painter. Her husband was a famous photographer. He was really like connected to the story and wanted to help Alice out. So he ends up getting a job at the psych ward that she's at to kind of help get her to talk and all of that. I really like this book. The ending is insane. It's one of those books that has so many chapters and they're really short and it's just like a really easy read. So I actually finished this book like a week and a half before we were supposed to finish it for the podcast. And it's because one night I just like kept reading it and I got stuck with it. I will say, given the different tone, it's very intense. It's sad. You know, it really like, especially reading at night, it would sometimes make you feel a little like spooked out. Like, it made me just feel very uncomfortable at times and just kind of like icky reading it. I would highly recommend reading it. Overall, we had given this one, I believe, a 4.25 out of 5 lattes, which actually made it our highest rated book so far. With that being said, those are all the books that I've read so far in 2023. And I gotta say, again, I've enjoyed all of them. I don't think there's been a bad book I've read so far. Although maybe like with This Time Tomorrow, I wouldn't necessarily recommend reading it. I still would be like, if you read it, good for you. And then kind of the same goes for Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. But Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, The Silent Patient, and The Lion's Den, I highly recommend reading those. With that being said, that's it for today's video. Thank y'all so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye!